Welcome to the Power Exit Podcast. This show is dedicated to business owners who want to scale up, plan smarter, and prepare for the ultimate exit. We'll talk with M&A experts and owners who've been through the process to provide actionable advice so that you can sell your business on your terms and without regret. I'm John Marsh. Join me as we prepare to take control of your exit. All right, welcome to the next episode of the Power Exit Podcast. I'm thrilled to have a good friend here, Will Godwin with SSP. Will, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, tell us a little bit about what you do and who you are.
Yeah, thanks for having me, John. Excited to be here. My name is Will Godwin. I'm with Sterling Seacrest Pritchard. For short, we call it SSP. We're an insurance brokerage and risk management firm based in Atlanta, Georgia. We're independently owned, privately held company, top 50 firm, and I help lead our private equity and M&A practice. So that is on the kind of property and casualty side of the insurance. So working with financial sponsors and family office and strategics on insurance diligence, transactional risk, and post-close insurance programs and placements, things like that.
Well, great. Well, your perspective is interesting today. We will try to make sure that folks stay awake. We are talking about insurance. So, but I think we met at either the ACG M&A South or one of the events, and you're very active in this space. So, insurance is not something our clients often think about when it comes to a transaction. But the goal of this podcast is to educate folks on all aspects of a transaction. And we don't want them to neglect something that really could impact them and does impact them. So, what I wanted to start with, Will, was when business owners hear insurance in M&A, they think it's just a box to check. We're going to get a diligence checklist and submit the policies, the deck pages, and just move on. But how should owners really think about the role insurance plays in the process of selling their business?
Sure. Yeah, I think you're definitely right. Like it's usually kind of last on the diligence box, and we're kind of aware of our position here. I think it's really crucial when it goes wrong. So I think having a trusted partner there, it's really key from our perspective, right? When we're working with buyers. On the owner side and on the seller side, I think it's something that it's obviously going to get looked at from a professional standpoint. It's not always going to get held against you, but I think it gives the buyer more certainty if they know they have that the seller is thinking about risk proactively and that they can identify what their risk is. And at least have been thinking about mitigation. So we don't just look at like the insurance policies. We want to think about, risk management and loss control. And we're going to look at their claims. And if they've had a bunch of claims, have they done anything to improve their profile, right? So looking at, I think it just gives certainty to a buyer, and the seller should obviously care about that because, there are instances where it can get you could have to put an escrow aside or maybe it gets retraded if it's really under market in terms of what they have in their insurance program and lack of coverage and lack of limits. So it certainly is a smaller portion of the whole diligence spectrum, but it's really important, and we've definitely seen it. We've seen it, I wouldn't say kill deals, but affect deals negatively to the seller.
Well, you hit on something that's very important there. Our job is to go into a deal and give enough information for the buyer to stand behind their LOI. And if you are underinsured, that there's a risk there that you need to be retraded, and the buyer, or that a buyer will retrade you. Now, we're going to push back on that, but we don't want to have those excuses or give a buyer an excuse to do that. So making sure you're adequately covered, especially in some of these high risk industries, if you will. I've
Sure.
many kind of men in the truck businesses, the tree services, HVAC, fire protection. If your EMR is not where it needs to be and you're underinsured, that's a problem, right?
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit specifically about common insurance issues that create unwelcome surprises during due diligence. Well, I obviously talked about EMR there, but can you point to some of those things that you see, Will? Because you're on the buy side, right? You're typically working for
Mostly on the buy side. So mostly working with sponsors, buying companies from founders. And I would say biggest issues that we find from a policy standpoint, it's for sure not having cyber insurance or management liability, which is like directors and officers, uh, and then inadequate umbrella limits, especially in those businesses you talked about, like residential services. They've got a lot of vehicles on the road. Maybe there is completed operations issues that could arise if they're in the more of a construction facing industry. Well, if you don't really have an umbrella over it, I mean, these claims, especially in Georgia and other jurisdictions, can get so large that not having adequate umbrella limits, which can be somewhat subjective, it's kind of up to the buyer of the insurance of how much risk they're willing to transfer and versus what they're willing to take. We see those limits exceedingly low for the risk of the company.
Yeah.
So those, I mean, I've never done a deal where the buyer doesn't put in cyber insurance. Like that's kind of table stakes at this point. And then also management liability. So the directors and officers, fiduciary liability, employment practices liability, because that's really protecting the directors and officers of the company and the management teams and the employer itself. So those always get on, and I wouldn't say that counts against the seller. So, I mean, sometimes it's one person and it's like they've been running a business and maybe it's a fairly small business. They haven't had a ton of claims, but every deal they're going to put that in. The buyer is going to put those coverages in. Other issues, I think kind of risk management and contract review, looking at any sort of contractual requirements. A lot of times the vendors or customers will require them to have certain levels of insurance, certain types of policies, and maybe they don't actually adhere to that. So that is a red flag for us. Claims issues, like things that have been open, like sometimes they'll have claims open, right? It was 3-4 years ago and they haven't closed them yet. That's obviously that can create an issue. It's like, we're going to have to dig into that before closing so the buyer can get comfortable, because something typically will close within that time period. And why is it open? Does the seller even know that this claim is still open? So I think just in general, it's a good idea for the seller to have a review done pre-LOI, I would say. And a lot of these can get explained, and at least if they're aware of, okay, there might be some issues here, or this is why we didn't buy this coverage, or we're working on a fleet safety program, or like as long as I think the first step is identifying, and if they haven't even identified by the time they've gotten to LOI and a diligence, an insurance diligence provider in there, they're already behind. So at least having that review and kind of aware of their faults, I would say, or their blind spots is helpful. But we find all sorts. I mean, sometimes like we found, a massive underreporting of sales exposure on the Jeep general liability policy recently for a deal where the audit exposure for this company, because general liability is rated, it's based on the sales of the company for this particular industry. And there was it was over $1 million of audit exposure that they could potentially be liable for at an audit, which the policy was going to get audited. The insurer had a right to audit. So I know that's a lot of insurance speak, but I think that it's a thing that a lot of sellers sometimes, frankly, buyers don't think a lot about, and it can cause a huge headache. So getting in front, I mean, and John, you know better than anybody, like you're trying to avoid that anything like this kind of getting discovered 3-4 weeks before closing, even a month before, 2 months before closing. It just becomes massive headache and and if there's already other issues, that could be the straw that broke the camel's back on some of this.
So that was a great example, a real world example. How was that addressed in the deal? Was there an indemnification basket, escrow?
Yeah, there was the buyer got the seller to indemnify that audit, and uh, but it was a big deal, and we were able to, you know, we had to. There was an increased cost right at closing because we put in a new program, and we go from $5 million in sales to or $10 million in sales to $40 million in sales. So we got a better rate. We had more revenue to go out to the insurance market with, and so we got the rate down a lot. But the normalization of the insurance spend, I mean, was a lot for everybody to get comfortable with, and it took a lot of explaining and understanding and going back and working with the attorneys. So that, I mean, that could have folded the deal,
Right.
quite frankly. I think they were far enough in it and they liked the deal enough that they were able to work around it and find a solution.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. We'd love those real world examples. So, you know, you've hit on some of this. I don't mean to be redundant, but what steps can an owner take 2 to 3 years before a sale to improve kind of the risk profile? And I don't want to say maximize value. I don't know that we maximize value through insurance, but obviously that downside of a retrade. But what are some best practices that folks should do now?
Yeah, I think they should invite, another broker or a few brokers to look at their insurance program. No broker is going, it's like you're never going to say, I don't want to meet with this business owner who's going to sell their business, right? Even if he's not or she's not. Like you can always get like that. That's how we make a living is meeting people and meeting business owners and meeting, for me, it's private equity sponsors, but like nobody's going to turn down that meeting. So I would say if you don't, unless you have a great relationship and a really good understanding of risk and insurance, and you really trust your broker and you kind of understand risk management, I would invite a few others to look at it and do a review of your program. I think there would be people lining up wanting to do that. So, and you don't have to switch. I think it's just like, hey, I want to make sure, I want an objective viewpoint, and they might all say different things, but there's going to be some through lines, right? Of like, well, we haven't addressed this, you know what I mean? That we don't have cyber, we don't have a fleet safety program, and we have 50 vehicles on the road. Like we haven't even thought about that. So that's what I would do to prepare. Like, it doesn't take that much time for brokers to do that, to review policies and provide recommendations. And then I would go back to the incumbent and talk to them. I mean, have them review as well, but talk to them about how do we right size this? What's applicable to our business, our operations, and how can we kind of just have better hygiene around risk and insurance. So again, I think most of it's like if they're thinking about it and actually can identify where their risk lies, like that should give pretty good confidence to a buyer.
Yeah.
Like the insurance, like, okay, you have a $5 million umbrella, you should have a $10 million umbrella based on peer benchmark. Like that's not going to change. Like the buyer doesn't care that much about that ultimately. I mean, it's good for them to know on a go forward basis, but they're not going to hold, and they're going to have an issue with that, I would say. So.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you for that. So we spend a lot of time talking about being prepared, right? Building the data room before you're ready and making sure that, when you sign a new contract that goes into your quote unquote data room, so that when it is time to sell a business, you have it already. You're not trying to gather all this information while running your business. From an insurance perspective, what should we be retaining and updating yearly in that data room?
Sure. The biggest items are the policies and the loss runs, which I think there's always, I mean, quite frankly, that's always the hardest thing to get is the loss runs because they need to be updated and valued recently. So in the last 30 to 60 days. And a lot of sellers are kind of doing this on their own. They may have a business broker, or they may have an investment banker, but maybe they don't want to tell their broker they're selling their company. So they don't reach out to their broker to update the loss runs, which is really the easiest way to do it for them to order the loss runs. And they don't they don't want to go to every insurance company. So that's always a big rub of of getting those currently valued. That's something that I think the seller's broker should be able to put together and should be doing, quite frankly, anyway, is kind of updating those every year and providing a loss update and summary and a status of each claim and how they're helping and advocating those claims and getting through that process. So that current policies, any sort of documents related to risk management, insurance, like contracts, if they have a sub agreement, if they have an independent contractor agreement, customer agreements, those are all probably part of what you're updating anyway, and then schedules, like equipment schedules, like what does the insurance company actually have on file versus what we have on file on our balance sheet or on another equipment list, vehicle list, driver list is increasingly important because, sometimes there are drivers with multiple offenses. I would say, NVR monitoring is huge. That's not really, to your point, what you probably updating every year, but like having that control in place where there's maybe continuous NVR monitoring, or at least they're doing it once a year on their drivers, because they might not know that the driver had something, personally that popped up on their NVR. They could have 3 speeding tickets and maybe you're the employer that doesn't know about that.
Right.
But yeah, I think the big broad strokes are policies and loss runs and any schedules tied to the insurance. And I think contracts are probably already being uploaded and in that repository of data.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. Thank you for that. So what's the biggest gap between when sellers think, hey, I've got a good enough insurance coverage versus what institutional sophisticated buyers expect? You've hit on some of this stuff, especially cyber, but is there anything else that you would add there?
Cyber management liability, types of professional liability. At times, like, sure, just because you're not a doctor or a lawyer doesn't mean you don't need professional liability. That doesn't mean there's going to be, there could still be financial damages arising from your negligence, depending on the industry. Pollution, and so like anything like specialty coverages like that. But there's also some of what we see, and it depends on what the buyer is going to do with the company post closing. If it's a roll up and it's a platform for a roll up, it might be with a regional insurer that is really good and competitive. And we work with a lot of regional insurers that are great, but they're not going to be able. They're not licensed to underwrite and sell business in certain states, right? So, and they don't want to be in certain states, quite frankly. So that program, it can't be like a foundational insurance program for a national roll up. You know what I mean? If it's a South Carolina company, it's with a kind of a smaller regional insurer. They've done a great job, but how is that? How are you going to be able to grow that? Because I like growth. I'm sure you like growth. Underwriters don't always like growth. I mean, that's more and more exposure for them.
Right.
If you're going to roll up 8 different companies in a given year.
Right.
So understanding, I think that's where we really get plugged in. We've done a lot of roll up work. And it's understanding which markets can actually understand private equity and are comfortable with that growth. because a lot truly aren't. And I mean, that's our job to find the ones who are, or to get the incumbent comfortable with the plan, to do analysis on, okay, does this make sense to fold into a master program, or does it make sense for this add-on acquisition to sit separately for a little bit, to be based on claims history or loss controls, things like that. So I would say that, and then umbrella, like what we said, like umbrella really sits excess your auto liability, your general liability, and a part of your workers' compensation insurance. A lot of times those limits, the umbrella market's been, it's been hardening for a long time, but there's a lot of pressure, pricing pressure on that line of business. So a lot of folks don't want to buy higher limits, but why it's expensive is because the verdicts and the settlements and judgments are so much larger than they used to be. So that layer of insurance, those higher limits are actually getting tapped, and insurers are paying claims on it. So most institutional buyers want a layer of umbrella insurance or excess liability insurance that covers kind of like average settlement plus the defense cost of defending the claim. I mean, that's kind of like the low bar for that. So it's all of those things. I mean, I would say, yes, from a policy perspective, just to kind of repeat myself, like cyber, directors and officers, and then umbrella, and sometimes professional liability.
Wonderful. Thank you. Let's move on to reps and warranties insurance. Obviously that's something that we're seeing more of. Can you just explain to maybe a business owner who may be listening who's not familiar with reps and warranties, what it is, what kind of coverage it gives them, and the purchase agreement?
Yeah, of course. Reps and warranties is, extremely common and ubiquitous now. And it used to not be, I would say, especially in the lower middle market. I think at a high level, it's so the seller is going to represent certain things on the purchase agreement, right? Maybe it's financials, contracts, tax, IP, things like that. And if it comes out post closing that one of those was misrepresented or not accurate, then the buyer stands to make a claim on the seller. How that was traditionally done was through an escrow, an indemnification escrow. That was typically like about 10% of the enterprise value of the company.
Yeah.
So then the insurance market, I would say probably 15 years ago, it started becoming more common, where instead of having buyer and seller fight each other on this and having an escrow to go after, the insurance market created a policy that would cover these representations and warranties on the policy, and the buyer could make a claim on that policy instead of going to the seller. Typically we see and I think from a seller's perspective, it's great because you are going to probably have to split it, right?
Yeah.
A cost, or you're going to have to pay for the cost. But you get your 10% or most of it at close instead of having to wait 3 years or a year after closing. So we see it a lot. I usually see some buyers still don't like to pay for it. I mean, they still don't like to do it, and they're fine with the escrow. But I think in a competitive situation, having reps and warranties, especially if you're taking somebody out to market, John, I mean, it's attractive if the buyer is willing to split that cost or understands reps and warranties insurance.
Yeah.
So it's a great tool. I would say it's used in most deals we do. I think it's increasingly becoming popular in the lower middle market. So it's probably $15-20 million in enterprise value up to 100, where I think for a while it was kind of 100 to 100 above with pretty standard. So it continues to come down market. The market is soft. That is all based on activity and volume and number of deals being done. So, I mean, there have been claims that have pushed up pricing a little bit, but it's still a soft market. You can still get a policy for a $20-25 million enterprise value deal.
Wonderful. Yeah, and for the audience who may not understand what how a transaction works, there's going to be an amount that's held in escrow, usually, like Will said, 10% of the purchase price or the enterprise value, that's held for 12 to 24 months, held by a third party to satisfy claims that come up post-closing, or that a breach of reps and warranties. That's common in deals, but purchasing a reps and warranties policy may mitigate that need for that escrow amount, meaning, like Will said, you get 10% in your pocket rather than being held by a third party for a significant period of time. So thanks, Will, for explaining that.
Of course.
As we wrap up here, kind of maybe give us 3 practical things an owner should do this year if they want to avoid insurance-related surprises in a future transaction.
I would
Cyber.
Yeah, I know. I feel like a broken record. I mean, I think it's really important for a business owner, one, to think about insurance probably more seriously, because I think they understand probably their business risk, right? And like, okay, if this contract doesn't go through, if I can't make a certain amount of money, or they understand even like financial metrics or operational metrics, they might not understand what they can transfer to the insurance market, why that's important, and get it off of their balance sheet. And a lot of people just haven't had a bad claims experience. I think once you've gone through the claims process, you see the value of insurance, especially if you have a broker that's advocating for you. You have a good insurance company relationship, and you can transfer that risk that would have really been detrimental to your business. So that's one thing. I think just being able to quantify and I think this goes back to talking to your current provider, and having an honest conversation about, well, like, where, and maybe the broker's told them this, maybe they haven't, but like, where am I today? What am I exposed to that we're not covering? What are we covering, and for how much? And then being able to quantify that. I think what's hard for the buyer and what's hard for me on the buyer side is being able to, like, what they're not insuring, like, it's that number of potential losses. I mean, it could be gigantic, and the buyer doesn't want unknown things. The seller or the business owner today doesn't want that unknown. So I think just having a clear picture and being able to say, look, I get it. Like, this isn't going to be a month project, but I'm going to take a day and have my broker come through and provide a deliverable. They should be able to do that on where am I exposed? Just kind of like a stewardship of your insurance program and where you're covered, what you're spending. Really just kind of get to know kind of the high level metrics of things and where you're exposed, and thinking about, and then think about purchasing insurance based on that. I think that makes you a smart buyer of insurance, and just a business owner who is being thoughtful about their risk, their insurable risk. I mean, to the extent that you can insure it. So I would do that. I think look into cyber insurance, I would say. Like, I know we hit on that, but like, I think a lot of people think that if they don't have like extremely private data, or if they're not using they're not paying electronically all the time, or maybe they're not a tech company, they think they don't have any exposure there, which really isn't the truth. I mean, pretty much anybody who uses a computer in their business in any capacity has exposure there. And we've seen claims come down very far in the marketplace for it's small businesses getting hit. I mean, now you can have, you can go purchase ransomware as a service on the dark web and have it infiltrate somebody's system and lock it up and demand a ransom payment or sell the data on the dark web. So there's all sorts of things that we're exposed to, that business owners are exposed to from a cyber perspective where they think they may not have any exposure. But I really think, yeah, it just starts with like a transparent conversation with your provider. If you feel like you're not getting the full story or maybe there's not a lot of trust there, then I would go to, talk to other business owners and who they use and just have an open conversation with people and have them analyze your program and your any documents pertaining to risk that isn't just the policies and have them give recommendations. And I think that's a good starting point. I think that's better than most sellers do.
You were kind and humble. What you should have said is the business owner should call SSP and will. So,
Yeah.
is there anything else that we didn't cover that you think is important to address?
I think we covered it mostly. I mean, I would say, I'm not an employee benefits specialist, but that is a huge part of what we do here at SSP, and that is part of our diligence process as well. I think, Jev and maybe Knox and our private equity group, they really have a good handle on that, and that's all they do. Just like all I do is the commercial insurance, but that's a big part of it. I didn't want to forget that. I don't know if I can speak super knowledgeable about that, but we do a ton of that, and that's also important. I think that's less important in the short term, right? Like, you usually don't have to switch that out, or there's not additional coverages to purchase at closing for employee benefits. That is a huge part, I know, of the buyer strategy. And a lot of these deals is like, let's really look at the employee benefits program and provide something that can be attractive to the current employees, but also, attracting and retaining good talent. So that's a big part of what we do as well.
I think business owners often don't want to let the proverbial cat out of the bag. They don't want to tell their team that they're considering selling.
Yeah.
But I think it is important to, have that honest conversation with your entire team, your CPA, your wealth manager, your insurance broker, and let them know, what your plans are, even if they're, 3 to 5 years out, so that you can avoid the surprises that we're trying to avoid so that a good deal gets done.
I will add, John, real quick, just at least from an insurance perspective, I'm sure you probably see this from other advisors. If your broker is on your team and kind of has an understanding of what's going on, I know some sellers really want to keep everything close to the vest and not tell anyone they're having a transaction. But if you have that trusted relationship with your broker, I'm on the other side of the transaction, and what we're trying to do, quite frankly, is to be the broker post closing, where when we don't get when we can't get inserted in there post closing, and some private equity firms are heavier handed, right? They'll say like, you're going to use them, and they're going to make that clear before you close or right after, and it doesn't matter. But where we actually don't get the business is where the seller's broker knows what's going on, right? They've been able to give us good information, accurate information quickly. They've been able to answer so a lot of times we're talking to the seller's broker directly. I mean, we'll get introduced to them because we're both insurance people and understand this weird world and can talk to each other and get things done quicker.
Yeah.
If that relationship's really good and they're actually providing good service, they understand their claims, they have a good program in place, they can they can show that they've offered certain coverages and thought about them, and maybe this is why they haven't been purchased this yet. If they can do all that, like, and the seller is staying on board and rolling equity and gonna have a meaningful role and stake in the new company going forward, like, we won't sometimes we don't get the business because of that.
Yeah.
So I think and that probably goes for other advisors, it's probably a little more relevant in insurance. But so I would say that to your sellers is important. Is like I think having some help, your broker should be able to do a lot of this for you. I don't think it doesn't have to be like, oh, I've got to add something else to my plate as a business owner. I think let me empower my broker to go do this. Let me get him on. He is on my team. She is on my team. Like, let's all row in the same direction and understand how to make this better. And I think it's a better result for the seller for sure. But also, if the seller loves his broker, maybe it could be a better result for them as well.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, Will, thank you for spending some time here and being on the podcast. If a listener wanted to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Sure. Our website is sspins.com. I think we've got my email and number on there, and a bunch of other people on there that are more talented than I am and really know their stuff. So you can check that out. My email is wgodwin@sspins.com. And I think with the internet now and with how easily we put out our information, especially on our website, you should be able to get a hold of me. But I really appreciate you having me on, John. This has been fun.
Well, thank you so much, Will.